As you get older, you're probably gonna get invited to a lot of weddings. Like we did. Our friends Megan and Dave are getting hitched in a couple of months, and when you roll with a fashionable crew like I do, we've got to look stunning. Which means I will be going crazy, making something custom. We decided the theme for our outfits would be pinstripes and corset backs. So with those two elements, I've been sketching and testing patterns to see what kind of rocking outfits we're going to put together. I'm Emmy, and I am so glad to have you here. This is Crafter of Many Kinds.
Now, friends, you might be wondering, hey, how did that giant California storm with all the rain that destroyed your studio all turn out? Well, badly. It went badly. Which is why you're going to be seeing some footage that was actually filmed about a year ago. You'll be watching me battle my freezing studio, crappy doctors, mistaken fabric orders, all so I can get this outfit done in time for my friend's 1-year anniversary. I mean, wedding. For her wedding. Yeah, it really has been that long.
When Jess and I were planning out what we were going to wear to the wedding, we decided that we wanted to do some kind of cool gender-bendy outfits that included pinstripe suits, but had been feminized in some way. But after looking around, I couldn't find pinstripes anywhere that I could buy stuff, so I had to start from square one. I decided not to make everything on this outfit because I found a really cool shirt that had these wavy sleeves and billowy cuffs. So I decided to focus on just making a matching vest and skirt. I wanted two things: enough pocket space to hold my cell phone, and to have a skirt with lots of movement as I walked around, or at least looked cool while I leaned. I decided to go with the mermaid silhouette since I knew that the bride wasn't wearing that style, and thought that with enough fabric on it, it would billow out as I walked. Because I couldn't wear an extreme mermaid skirt and still be expected to do anything more than shuffle, I decided to go for a high-low and put a low pointed seam in front and a high one in the back so I'd still be able to take some longer steps. For the vest, I decided to copy this high-low but in reverse, bringing the bottom of the vest a few inches down from my waist and to have long tailcoats in the back. I also added a corset back to match how Jess was altering her pinstripe outfit, but also so I'd have an adjustable size due to my irregular weight. I thought if nothing else, that shirt and vest combo would likely go with a bunch of other stuff in my wardrobe and could be used for other events. The main pattern making challenge of this project is going to be how to create both the high-low half circular flare pieces to create those beautiful waves. On the skirt, the flare will need to hit the same length on my body despite the seam of the upper skirt being uneven. While on the vest, the flare will need to start short in the front and end at the back of my knees with the seam to the upper vest being even. Both of these will require lots of fabric and a lot of math and testing to make sure that they are correct and that the pinstripes stay even. I will also need a very accurate count of how much yardage I will need for this project so I don't overpay on fabric. To combat this, I've decided to try and create a quarter-sized dress form from some modeling foam that I have. This is a common technique in fashion design that helps you test out how a design will look in miniature to show you how much fabric it will take up, while allowing you to work in a small scale that won't use up as much resources or space. So, for example, if my waist is 40 inches around, the waist on the quarter scale mannequin is going to be 10 inches. Any pattern that I make on the quarter scale, I just need to size up, and it should have fairly accurate measurements for a full scale version. This will help me figure out exactly how much fabric I will need to buy to get those large flares correct and stay within my budget. The first thing I'm going to do is try and get some accurate measurements of my body. I already know how big I am around in certain spots like my neck, bust, waist, and hips, so now I just need to know how big those things should appear on a 3D model. My idea is that by measuring my width on both my front and side using a grid for measurement, I'll create a fairly accurate quarter scale shaped figure. I'll then carve down the foam figure to match my circumference measurements. I've seen this technique used by wood carvers and thought that it might work here. Today, I'm using purple insulation foam in craft sizes. It's from my craft stash in the UK, so it isn't exactly a half-inch wide, so it's presenting a challenge to match it with the figure perfectly when the whole thing is in inch scale. My idea is now that I have accurate measurements on how I'm shaped on both the front and sides, I can use them to create a rectangle for each slice. If in quarter scale, my front was supposed to be 5 inches across and my side is 4.5 inches, then I should make a rectangle of foam that's 5 inches on two sides and 4.5 inches on the others. My theory was that if I could put all of those correctly sized rectangles together, it would form a good base to work from when I started to carve it apart to make my curves. Once I've got all the rectangles cut, I'm going to put them into order so that they match my shape. I ended up with 17 slices to work with, so I made sure to label each slice with a number and which portion of the rectangles were supposed to be the side and front. As I stacked them into the right position, I used some of my longer pins to hold the shapes solidly in place. Once I get all of the slices into the correct shape, I'm going to cut off all of the unnecessary bits now so I won't have to carve through them later. I had a hard enough time with getting the X-Acto knife through these earlier, so I decided against trying to use that for this part and instead busted out my electric styrofoam cutter. I bought it a while ago, but haven't had the opportunity to use it on anything and decided that this was the perfect project to give it a shot on. It did totally cut through the foam like butter, but it also melted it and created all of these glassy-like shards that I wasn't expecting. It also made lots of smoke, so I had to turn on all of my fans and open all of the windows while I worked on this.
Remember, kids, craft with proper ventilation.
I was really nervous doing this part since I had only the exact right amount of materials to make this one figure on hand, so if I messed up, the whole project would be over. This foam was used for the last costume that I worked on in the UK for my graduation project, which was to try and recreate the famous ship wigs of the 18th century for stage productions. Since I didn't need to make a historically accurate version, I decided to recreate the ship using this foam. Since the material is so light, I would be able to create a rather large ship using it without adding much weight to the wig. I used the same slice technique to create the hull of the ship that I'm using on the mannequin here today, and I was really pleased with the end results. I'd originally been saving this foam for a second attempt at the project, but now that I'm back in the States where everything is an imperial instead of metric, I decided that it might be easier on me if I tried to find actual half-inch foam for future projects, so it was probably okay to let this batch go. As a craft supply hoarder, sometimes it is hard to use the supplies that you've been saving up for a really long time for a particular project, but the only way to clear out that stash is to learn to let it go. The next part of the project, I decided to move out to the garage. Welcome to the studio a year ago when it was still messy, but at least had not been flooded yet. I figured that glue fumes were not going to be the healthiest thing to spray in my room after I'd already had the issues with the burning styrofoam.
Remember, kids, craft with proper ventilation.
The spray adhesive I'm using is really good, and I've used it to adhere fabric to things as well as this foam to itself. It is the lightest and strongest option, but it does take a really long time to dry. I decided to split the form up into 4 different sections, glue the slices together in those smaller sections, then come back and glue those all together into one form. The dry time between sprays was about 2 to 4 hours, so this step alone ended up taking most of a workday. Once the form was all together, the idea was to mount it onto this marble paper towel holder. I'll just need to drill a hole 7 inches into the bottom of the mannequin to accurately represent my height in 1/4 size. Now, to take my dress form from the Minecraft block nightmare to an actual people shape, I'm going to be using our Dremel with a rounded sanding head. But remember,
Craft with proper ventilation and eye protection.
My idea is to now add curves onto the corners and shape it into more of a conical object until it matches my quarter scale measurements around. So in this case, the neck measurement needs to be 4 inches in circumference when finished. This Dremel is secondhand, and I've tried to get the lighter extended attachment to work, and I just haven't been able to. So I will be having to hold the whole Dremel body while I work on this. It was really heavy and a bit hard to use with my small hands, so I had to be really careful not to accidentally drop it onto my other hand or grind it too hard into the figure. I decided to start with the easiest measurement to match, which was my neck. And after I got that to 4 inches around, I realized that a ton of my figure was gonna have to come off to match the other measurements. So rather than sit there and grind through it all with the Dremel, I busted out my tiny hacksaw and started taking off huge chunks. With how much time and energy it was taking to get through the foam with the Dremel, I decided to try and get the larger portions off with the saw and just leave the Dremel to smooth things out. So I am having some difficulty squaring how much I have to cut off of this figurine. The starting measurement of the figurine was 21 inches, which is this big. Now, according to my calculations, because my bust is 46 inches, at 1/4 of that size, it should be 11.5, which is that big. I'm not entirely sure how the photos of my measurements could have shown me being at the size that I was when I measured it, and then somehow need to be reduced by basically more than half. Or it's about half. I guess I don't feel necessarily bad about cutting off half the foam, other than I just worry about that I'm going to lose my all sense of, what size anything should be or where it should be, the more I cut into it. Especially because looking at the half scale pieces, they look fairly accurate from what I look like from the side and the front. But, obviously there is some kind of loss of detail in there. The Dremel is also a lot harder to hold for extended periods. I'm currently dealing with a strained muscle already in my neck and shoulder, and honestly holding the Dremel is not helping. I'm not entirely sure how to fix this. Without seriously chopping into this foam figure, and it's the only foam I have, so there's no remaking it, let alone that I don't have time. I think I have 3 other weekends to work on this, and I haven't even ordered the fabric yet because obviously I don't know exactly how much I need. At this point, I could probably just make it an overestimate and overpay just to make sure that it gets here on time. And then in the meantime, just sort of keep working on this, which is what I think is going to end up happening. I'm not feeling very confident at the moment in my idea as I was even last week when I was working on this. I think I'm going to give it another hour to 2 hours, and if I don't feel like I have something workable at that point, I think I will abandon this for the time being, and attempt to do this old style. I will attempt to do it with a human-sized figurine, but I don't really have all that much spare fabric for me to be draping with right now. Wish me luck. So I decided to just try matching one of my measurements to the figure, so that I could sort of have a control and kind of go out from there. So I decided to use my back measurement because I figured that would probably be easier to match than the front of the bust. My back measurement is 15 and a half, and so at a quarter of a scale, it should be like about like 3 3/4 or so with a little bit of extra on there. And I went in pretty hard with the Dremel, and I got to a point where the back was pretty much almost, I think, further into the figure than the neck was. And obviously that's not true for my measurements. And it wasn't anywhere close to 3 3/4 inches. And it's the entire bust was still 4 inches too big. So the only thing that I can think of at this point is that when I made the measurements for the figure from my own, that maybe I did a third instead of a fourth. And so at this point, this figure is ruined, and there's no fixing it. I do not have enough time to attempt another attempt, so maybe in the future I will attempt this project again, because I do actually really want a 1/4 dress figurine, but it's not going to happen today, and it's not going to happen within the next 2 weeks. So that's it. Okay, I'm just gonna shut it down and start working on pattern making in some other way. I was so demoralized after failing that project that I started cleaning the garage door instead, to just try and give myself something to do while I decompressed and tried to regroup. I am not entirely sure where I went wrong with my measurements. What was really frustrating was realizing much later on that the size of the slices were actually much closer to my half scale measurements than my fourth scale. And I don't know, maybe if I had realized that at the time, maybe there was some way to have salvaged the project, but I'm just not sure. You heard me mention earlier that I had a strained muscle in my neck, which had actually happened 2 days before I filmed this. I went to the doctor for what I thought was an ear infection, which turned out to be a pulled TMJ muscle. This is a muscle that is in your jaw that wraps around your ear canal, and it turns out that I'd actually pulled it during the making of this project because when I focus, I jut out my jaw, and that strains the muscle. I have since had to go to physical therapy for this issue and was even forced to wear retainers while I crafted until I learned to check myself when I was deeply focused. And wearing the retainer was so awful that it actually helped me to fix the problem, because I was just like, this is not sustainable to be wearing this gross, uncomfortable retainer every time that I sew. However, while I was filming this portion of the project with the Dremel, I had a massive headache and a strain on my right ear and neck, and I was just feeling awful. A couple of days after the failure of this project, I started noticing black discharge leaking from my right ear. I contacted my doctor, who had originally diagnosed the issue, and alerted them that the ear that they had checked just a few days ago was suddenly so much worse and was now exuding alarmingly colored fluids. They dismissed me and said that I had likely just injured my ear at some point, and that it was just old blood coming out of my ear. And I just decided to trust my doctor, and what ensued was literally the worst night I've ever had in my life.
I couldn't sleep due to the ache in my ear, and at about 2 a.m., this horrific stabbing comes out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, just mysterious clear greenish fluid comes pouring out of my ear. Having what felt like a spike driven into my head through my ear canal was probably one of the most invasive pains that I have ever felt. I spent the rest of the night until urgent care opened at about 6 a.m. the next morning, just crying and changing the tissues that were soaked by my ear fluids. This time when I went to the doctors, I brought Paul with me because, as crappy as it is, there are just some times where doctors don't take you seriously as a woman unless there is a man standing right behind you to back you up. Like, I had known that there was something wrong with my ear a week previously, and the doctor just blew me off. And I don't know if that's because it was Friday afternoon and they just didn't want to be bothered with it, or because somehow my alarming description didn't hit like the right keywords. But all I knew is that when I walked into the doctor's office this time, I was going to be taken seriously. I was physically suffering serious body damage because a doctor ignored me, and I wasn't going to let that happen again. Thankfully, the second doctor just took one look at my ear and was like, yeah, you have a ruptured eardrum. Probably brought on by bacteria that had been trapped next to my eardrum because of the TMJ sprain. And I asked him because I really wanted to know exactly how wrong the doctor had gotten it. And I said, if you had looked at this ear 24 hours ago, would you have known that it was infected? And he said, yes. And that made me so angry. But anyway, I got pain meds, I got antibiotics, I got muscle relaxers, and I went home and just automatically changed to a new doctor. But then I just cried and died for the next 3 days. All while now being freshly deaf in one ear. I feel a bit bad about sharing all of these downer stories with you guys, especially lately. But I feel like it's important sometimes to point out that our lives can get completely derailed by things that we can't control. Sometimes there are deeper reasons that we make mistakes that don't have anything to do with us being stupid or careless. There is every chance that I made a mistake on the math during the figure because my eardrum was literally rupturing. I still don't know, honestly, a year later, where the mistake came from, but maybe it would have turned out better had I actually not been working on it while I was completely ill. Which is bad news for the rest of the project because obviously I finished it while having a giant hole in my head. I don't always advocate for finishing projects or pushing yourself when you're sick, but I did end up having a backup outfit in case I found it all too overwhelming. So even though I did push myself to finish this project, it was within my means. But with the quarter scale mannequin idea scrapped, you know what that means? I'm gonna have to make a full-size pattern.
The good news is my brand new mannequin showed up just in time for me to work on this project.
Next time, I'm going to be trying to pattern this monstrosity while I blindly buy fabric online and try not to damage myself anymore while I try to get this outfit done on time. I'm so glad to have you here. This is Crafter of Many Kinds.